Welcome back, guys. Today we're talking about trees, specifically underwater trees, how to make them, how to keep them happy, and what types are the best. A little over a year ago when we made the big Ancient Gardens tank. If you've been following along, you know that tank. It was set up for about 6 or 7 months, and we had a ton of underwater trees in that aquarium. The primary plant that was on those trees, like this tank you see behind me, is of course Monte Carlo, one of my favorite plants, especially when it comes to making trees. There are some other types of plants that you can use to make trees, and we're going to cover all that in this video, but just in case you want to see a brief overview of making trees, the different styles, and how I like to do it, I'll have a link for the video that I did comparing 3 different types, so check that out. Hopefully if YouTube's doing its job, it should be the first recommended video, but who knows. Behind me is the new Ancient Gardens tank, or the Ancient Gardens 2.0, whatever we ended up calling this thing. It obviously has a bunch of trees in it. Maybe if this is the first time you're seeing this tank, they might not look like trees right now. It's because it's a little overgrown, okay? But regardless of the status of my trees, if you guys are looking for a really awesome rimless aquarium, super high quality glass, look no further than Waterbox Aquariums. They're a channel sponsor. I'll have them linked in the description. Check out what they have to offer, both fresh and saltwater tanks. But now that we have that out of the way, guys, let's talk about how to make yourself some underwater trees. The first thing you need to decide is what type of tree you want to start with. So there's a few different types. The ones that I have the intricate branch work that form the canopy of the trees. There's a couple other styles, notably the tabletop trees is what I call them, and they just have these little circular pedestals that you're meant to glue plants to, like Bucephalandra, Anubias, and I mean, you can get really creative with them. There's no limits to this, but I have limited experience with those, and I recommend starting out with these branched type trees. These trees are getting a lot more popular, so you can find them at a lot of different retailers, but the ones that I like and have used in the past are Flip Aquatics and Boost Plant, which we have coupon codes for, of course, but there's also some more wholesale type places that have a retail component. I think it's, what is it called? I believe it's just bonsaiaquarium.com. I don't know, I'll put links for everything, of course, to make this a really easy resource for you, but they're kind of starting to be everywhere now. So pick your tree, that's obviously the first step. The size, the shape, the vibe of it is totally up to you. There's a lot of different choices, but just get something that's going to fill out your aquarium. The last thing you want is to have just 1 or 2 little trees in something like an aquarium this size, which is 50 gallons. We obviously have more than a few, and they range in size and shape. The next thing that you need to decide is what type of plant you want to grow on your tree. So with the branched type, I think this makes it really easy and perfect for plants like Monte Carlo, moss, and then even moss balls. Those are the 3 examples that I gave in that other video that hopefully you've seen or you're about to watch or just watched and came back to this, but those are my top 3 picks. I think those are the most popular as well. They all have their own upsides and downsides. You know, moss can be kind of tough. If it gets algae in it, you're pretty much done. You got to start over. The Monte Carlo, assuming you can grow Monte Carlo easily, should be a good bet for you. I obviously have really good success with it. That's why it's my favorite. And then you have, of course, the moss balls, which they just kind of chill, do their thing. Some people like them, other people don't. Totally up to you. One thing that I really love about the branch type trees is that you really don't have to do any kind of gluing, whereas those pedestal trees, you definitely need to use some adhesive to keep your plants on there. And this is going to be the case for whatever type of plant that you want to use on these branch trees. You just nestle them down in the branches and they act as their own kind of adhesive. They just keep everything in place and it's super easy. I did find it a little bit more difficult when trying that technique with the moss balls, but you can make it happen. It's super easy with moss and it's super easy with Monte Carlo. Once you get your tree planted, the only other thing you need to do is make sure that it's going to adhere to wherever you're putting it in the aquarium, or it has some kind of a weighted base. I know some of the suppliers of these trees, they have like a rock bottom on them that they're fixed to, so that's going to be really good, especially when you don't have them pre-waterlogged. These trees in the tank behind me did not have that rock formation at the bottom to hold it down, so we would have had to waterlog these, but of course I went in and I used some super glue to stick them to other rocks in the aquarium to keep them in place. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to set out on setting up a new tank with trees, make sure you either have some kind of rock fixed to the bottom of them to hold them down, or that they're waterlogged enough to stay at the bottom of the aquarium. You can always fix them to stuff with super glue like I already mentioned, but that's just up to you. Some people don't like to use super glue, and I totally understand that. Now, when it comes to having a really successful underwater tree forest in your aquarium, there might be a couple things you need to do. Not so much when it comes to low-tech stuff like the moss balls, Anubias, or moss, but when using something like Monte Carlo, I think you do need to take a little extra step. And this is of course because it doesn't have any access to nutrients in the substrate, which is where it's typically planted. And interestingly, what I've found is that for the Monte Carlo growing on the trees, the nutrients don't seem to be that important. The really important factor is the CO2. I fertilize this tank sometimes, but I definitely go multiple weeks without adding anything to the water column, and these plants are obviously doing really good. So I attribute that success pretty much to the CO2, and we've confirmed that in the tanks behind me, and so if you follow along, you know what I'm talking about. If you're doing moss in your trees, you are going to have to keep up on the trimming, or else you're going to lose the shape of your trees, similarly to what happens with these when you let them grow too much. You do get the really cool like weeping willow effect. The Monte Carlo grows down and it looks really cool and very tree-like, but if you let it go too long, it's going to just turn into a bunch of floating balls of Monte Carlo, or at least it's going to look like that. So what I do and what I have done to this tank recently is basically just turn the CO2 way down, and I will eventually turn it off completely. My hope is that the Monte Carlo will then stay in kind of like a stasis mode where it won't be really growing, but it'll still be okay and it will just kind of stay where it is. That's the theory at least. I've tested it a little bit, but we're really gonna see with this tank. If you're doing a moss ball tree, then you probably don't need to worry about anything because moss balls are moss balls and they don't do a lot. Here's a nano tank that we set up quite a while ago, guys. It has two different trees in it. The one on the left has Bucephalandra. You might be able to see that. It's got a little bit of algae on it, unfortunately, but just one of those things that can happen with those slow-growing plants. And that tree is actually one of the tabletop styles. So that required gluing of the Bucephalandra rhizome to those tabletops. And then this one over here is a branch tree, and you can tell it just looks like a giant ball. I did just trim it recently, and it has pearlweed in it. So a plant that we accidentally put in here. We thought it was Monte Carlo, but it ended up kind of being a fun little experiment. So this thing requires a lot of trimming. Here's what the tank looked like just a few minutes ago before we did some work on it, and as you can tell, this thing can get totally overgrown. So you have to trim this, but it still does look pretty cool. We could definitely go in here and we could trim all those roots back to expose the trunk of the tree to make it look a little bit more like a tree, but you know, it's just totally up to you, and I felt like this was good enough. This tree, I think, highlights the possibilities when it comes to making a little underwater bonsai tree using stem plants. I've seen people do this same kind of thing without pearlweed, but with like red Liguigia, something that has a lot more vibrant color, pulling out the reds, and so it can look really fun and creative. You just have to be creative and try things that might not work. I think a really cool idea for a tree would be to do a branched one like this, but then put Pinnatophyta on it, a little high grow, and get that under some really high light and high CO2 conditions, pull out the sort of deep red that plant can have, and I think that would look absolutely beautiful. But yeah, guys, I think that's kind of it. I don't think there's much more to say about making underwater trees other than just know the materials, know where to grab them, and then just go for it. These things definitely add another dimension to your aquarium and your aquascape that I really love. Something interesting that I'll share with you is that, you know, we have some coolie loaches in this tank, and they're bottom dwellers. They hang out down to the substrate and they find little spaces to hide. But what I noticed starting way back, this was months ago, when I run on my treadmill on the other side of the room in the morning, I would look over, you know, I stare at all my tanks, right? But I would notice that the coolie loaches would be burrowing in and out of the trees, and I just thought that was so cool. Like, a fish that wouldn't typically do that or have access to something like this is taking advantage of a space that it really likes. So I just thought it was cool. Hopefully I can get some footage of it. I'll put it on Instagram or something. I wasn't able to find that footage because, I don't know, it's weird. They seem like they only do it in the mornings when I'm not having my camera out with me. So unfortunately I don't have that for today, but just keep an eye out for that. It's super cool. So yeah, I think that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. You learned kind of more about doing some underwater treescapes. They're super fun. Links, everything is down in the description. Also check out the sticker, magnet, and cling store. We got a bunch of new designs if you haven't been there in a while. I'm sure you'll be surprised at all the new stuff we have. So thank you so much for your support, guys. We'll start cranking out some videos here. Took a little break, a much needed break, but we're back and it feels good. So thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.